I used to dream about her. About my mother, I mean. I used to imagine what it would be like to wake up one day and she'd be there, right there beside me. I thought, maybe today will be the day. It's funny, isn't it? How you can hold onto a dream so tightly that it makes everything else feel blurry. But when I was a little girl, I always believed that someday she would come back, that she would realize how much she had missed me. I convinced myself that if I waited long enough, if I was good enough, she'd remember who I was. She'd see me again. It's so stupid, isn't it? To believe that someone who walked away could come back. Like it was all just a mistake. But that's what I did. I kept waiting. I guess I thought I was worth the wait. That one day, she'd see that I wasn't the little girl she abandoned anymore. But that day never came. Not once. She left me when I was so young, I couldn't even remember what it felt like to have her there. My memories of her are just flashes. Her laughing, her smile, the way she would brush my hair when I was small. But those memories, they're hazy now. They don't feel real anymore. And the rest of it, the abandonment, the silence, the years of waiting for a phone call or a letter that never came, those are the parts I remember the most. I used to tell myself that it wasn't her fault, that maybe she was just busy, that maybe she had her own demons to fight. I made excuses for her, over and over again. I don't know why I kept doing it. Maybe I thought if I kept believing in her, then it wouldn't hurt so much. But as the years went by, and the calls stopped coming, and the letters faded to nothing, I began to see the truth. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. She never wanted me. She never cared. And that's the hardest thing to swallow. To accept that the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally just didn't. To accept that I was nothing more than an afterthought in her life. I used to dream that she would come back, that she'd realize how much she'd missed. I used to think that if I was good enough, or maybe if I was patient enough, she'd show up one day, and everything would be different. That maybe, just maybe, she'd look at me and say, "I'm sorry." But that never came either. I waited and waited, but the phone never rang. I don't know why I kept hoping, honestly. Maybe I just needed to believe that something good would happen, even if it was too late. I don't know. But I kept waiting. I waited like a fool. I don't even remember the last time I heard her voice. I think the last time I saw her was when I was about 10, before she disappeared completely. The only thing left of her was the hollow feeling she left inside me. I grew up, but I didn't grow out of that feeling. No matter what happened, no matter how much I pretended, I never really stopped waiting for her to come back. I guess that's how it is when you love someone who doesn't love you back. You just keep holding on to a hope that will never be fulfilled. And it hurts. It hurts because I was never enough. It wasn't like I didn't try. I tried. I tried so hard. I would do anything to hear her tell me that she loved me. But she never did. And I think that's what killed me more than anything. The fact that she just never loved me. And now? Now she's gone. Just like that. Gone forever. And I can't even feel sad about it because the truth is, I've already grieved her. Years and years of grief, stretched out over a lifetime. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, when the end came for her, she would have reached out. Maybe she would have called me. Maybe she would have sent a letter. Or at least, I don't know, made some sort of peace. But she didn't. I thought maybe on her deathbed she'd say, "I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. I know I've been terrible to you. But I love you. I've always loved you." I thought that if she could just say those words, everything would be okay. But she didn't. She died without saying a single word to me, and maybe that's how it was always meant to be. The call came at 3:45 in the afternoon. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. They didn't know me. Didn't know the years of pain that came with hearing that my mother was dead. "I'm sorry to inform you," they said. "Your mother has passed." Those words, they shouldn't have felt like they did. They should have been just words. But they weren't. They were a door closing on everything I had ever wanted and every hope I had held on to for so long. It felt like something in me broke when I heard it. I didn't cry, though. I don't even know if I wanted to. It was like all the tears had already been used up. Like all the pain I'd carried for years had finally built up, and I was too numb to feel it anymore. The first thing that hit me when I pushed open the gate was the smell. It wasn't a bad smell. No, not at all. It was the smell of old wood, of memories, of things that had been preserved but not used. It was the kind of smell that settles into a place when it's been left alone for too long, when everything that should have been lived in had only been locked away. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd been here, but the smell? The smell had been there for as long as I could remember. The house stood before me, towering, familiar, and strange all at once. It was a grand house, the kind that had been built to last, built to impress. A place where families were supposed to live, to grow, to be happy. It had been beautiful once, before everything went wrong, before I was left behind. The ivy that crept along the walls used to look charming, like something out of an old storybook. Now it just looked tangled, messy, like everything in this house. As I stepped through the gate, the creak it made in protest felt like a reminder. Don't come back. Don't look back. The house wasn't mine, it never had been. And yet, there I was, standing at the threshold, like some kind of wandering ghost. I hesitated for a moment, just standing there, staring at the front door. I felt the weight of the years, of everything I had left behind, pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to walk away, to turn back and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. I had to go in. I had to face it. This place, this house, was where I had spent my childhood, but it was never home. It never felt like home. Not for me. The first memories I had of it were distant ones. Me, a little girl, watching my mother prepare dinner, humming to herself as if everything was perfect. I had thought it was perfect too. I had believed, in my naive little mind, that this was how life worked, that families were supposed to be like this, that you would be loved, cared for, and always given a place to belong. But I had been wrong. I had been wrong about everything. The house should have been filled with laughter, with warmth, with affection. It should have been a place where I felt loved. But it wasn't. Not for me. For Vanessa, maybe, but never for me. I had spent so many years dreaming about what it would be like to come back here, to feel like part of something again. But it was never going to happen. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I had been forgotten by my own mother, abandoned in ways that cut deeper than I was willing to admit. The lawyer arrived an hour after I stepped inside, bringing with him a heavy silence that seemed to settle in the room like an uninvited guest. I had expected him, of course, but there was something so clinical about his arrival, something so sterile, that it felt as if he were just another person sent to remind me that I was no longer a part of this world. He introduced himself, and his voice was polite, too polite for the kind of news he was about to deliver. He didn't know me, didn't know what my mother's death meant to me. He didn't know the years I had spent hoping, waiting, wishing for something. Anything. An acknowledgement. A shred of care. But now he was here, delivering the final blow in a way that felt almost too detached. It wasn't just the words he spoke. It was how they rang hollow in the room, how they felt empty, as though my mother's last wishes had been written in stone, and I, once again, wasn't part of the picture. He handed me the envelope, and I could feel the weight of it in my hands. Not physically, but emotionally. It was everything I had been holding on to, everything I had dreamed of. It felt like the last chance for something, for anything. I held my breath as I tore open the envelope, the sound of the paper tearing feeling deafening in the otherwise quiet room. To my beloved daughter Vanessa, the lawyer read aloud. And that was it. There was nothing more. I didn't even need to hear the rest. I felt the world shift beneath me, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. My stomach dropped, my breath caught in my chest, and I couldn't move. I couldn't process it. The lawyer went on, speaking about the estate, the family home, the things I had once believed might be mine. But they weren't. They never had been. Not once. I leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home, to you, my beloved Vanessa. I trust you will care for everything I have left behind. As you always have. There it was. In black and white. In writing. Proof that I had been invisible my entire life. I had always known it. But this was the confirmation. The irrevocable proof that I had never mattered. That my mother had never thought about me. I wasn't even a footnote in her life. The world around me spun for a moment, as if the air itself had been knocked out of me. My vision blurred, and for a second I thought I might fall. I wasn't sure how to react. I wasn't sure what was worse, the anger bubbling inside me or the cold emptiness that followed, as if everything that had once mattered, every shred of hope, every dream, had just disappeared, vanished into thin air. Vanessa had always been her favorite. I had known that. I had lived with it, day in and day out. But to see it so plainly, so undeniably in black and white, it shattered me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just that she left everything to Vanessa. It was that she had left me out entirely. I wasn't even worthy of a mention, not even a token gesture. There was no, and to my daughter Anna, I leave. There was no, I'm sorry, or I regret not being there. There was nothing. Just Vanessa. Everything had always been for her, and I had always been the one who was left behind. I tried to breathe, to make sense of it, but the words kept spinning in my head like a broken record. To my beloved daughter, Vanessa. Over and over they played in my mind, a reminder of everything I had never been, a reminder that I was nothing. The lawyer droned on about other formalities, about how the house would be transferred to Vanessa, how my mother's estate was now in her hands. But I couldn't hear him. His words were distant, like echoes, swallowed by the realization of what had just happened. My mother had made her choice. She had left me nothing but the remnants of a life that had been hers to begin with. I felt like the walls were closing in, like the air around me was getting thinner with each passing second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lash out, to break something, to make her hear me, even though she was gone. I wanted to ask her, why? Why had she never chosen me? Why had I been so invisible, so unworthy? But I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, frozen, as the truth washed over me. The lawyer left soon after, his departure as impersonal as his arrival. He had come, done his job, and left. He was just a messenger after all. I was left alone in this house, alone with my thoughts, alone with the reality that my mother had never wanted me, never loved me. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. I had always been the outsider, the one who had been pushed aside while Vanessa was the one who got everything, the love, the attention, the validation. But even as I told myself that, even as I tried to convince myself that I should have expected this, a part of me, the fool in me, had still hoped for something. A little recognition. Something. anything. But there was nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear apart the room, to throw everything on the floor, to break it all. I wanted to burn this house to the ground, to watch it crumble away, to feel some sort of control. But I didn't. I sat there, numb, staring at the envelope that had changed everything. Vanessa had won. She always had. And now, she had everything. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to lose all meaning in that moment. My thoughts swirled in a blur, and the emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, fought for space in my chest. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't leave like this. Not again. Not this time. I wasn't going to let Vanessa get away with this. Not again. Not without consequences. I may not have the house. I may not have her love. But I will have something. I will take something back. I'll make her pay for what she did to me. Vanessa had always been the center of everything, and I suppose, in some ways, she always would be. It wasn't just her looks, though yes, she was stunning. With the kind of beauty that turned heads and made people stop in their tracks, Vanessa was the one who could walk into a room and command attention without even trying. But it wasn't just her looks that made her so captivating, it was her presence. The way she had always known how to make everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the room. It was effortless for her, like breathing. Her charm wasn't something she needed to force. It just existed, and I hated her for it. But more than that, I hated myself for wanting to be her. I'd watched her my entire life, always standing in the background, never quite able to reach her level of grace, of confidence. I'd spent years trying to figure out what made her so special, why our mother could never look at me the way she looked at Vanessa. How could she not see me the way she saw her? How could she not see me, her own daughter, in the same light? I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I could just show my mother that I was worthy of her love, that she would come to see me as enough, as valuable, as lovable as Vanessa. But no matter how many years passed, no matter how many times I bent over backward to please my mother, the truth remained. I would never be the one who received her undivided attention. That was always for Vanessa. I wasn't like her. I never had been. Even now, standing in the place that was once supposed to be mine, I could feel the weight of Vanessa's perfection, her presence suffocating me. Even after everything, she was the one who still had the power, the one who still mattered. Vanessa had always known how to wrap our mother around her finger. It was almost effortless. I watched it happen from the time I was old enough to understand what was going on. Our mother adored Vanessa. She always had. Every word, every look, every gesture, every touch. Vanessa had always been the one who could do no wrong in her eyes. It wasn't that I didn't try. It wasn't that I didn't work hard to get her attention, to be the daughter she wanted. But it was never enough. It was never right. It wasn't as if Vanessa ever had to try, though. She never needed to. It was as though everything came to her so easily, like she was born with this gift, this perfect, effortless ability to make people love her. And well, I was just there, fading into the background, trying desperately to find a way to earn that love, never realizing that I was already doomed from the start. Looking at Vanessa now, it wasn't just her flawless appearance or her perfect posture that made me feel like I would never be enough. It was the way she moved, like she owned everything. The way she could enter a room, and without a single word, she would have every person in it eating out of the palm of her hand. Even the way she spoke, with that soft laugh that seemed to make everyone else laugh with her, to make everything feel light, even when it wasn't. It was all part of her effortless charm, the kind of charm I could never replicate. It was like a power she wielded, a force that everyone, including our mother, surrendered to without even realizing it. When I was younger, I used to think that one day our mother would look at me the way she looked at Vanessa. I used to think that maybe I was just waiting for my time, waiting for the moment when our mother would realize that I too was worthy of love. But that moment never came. And after a while, I stopped waiting for it. The years of abandonment and emotional neglect had shaped me into someone who was always left in the shadows of Vanessa's perfection. My mother's adoration for Vanessa was so constant, so complete, that it made me feel like I was invisible, a mere afterthought. And in many ways, I had come to accept it. That was my place. That was my role in the family, always the second choice, always the forgotten one. And when I left that family behind, I had hoped that being far away would somehow make the pain less sharp, but it never did. The distance only gave me time to reflect on everything I had never been, everything I had never had, everything Vanessa had taken from me without even realizing it. I was the one left with nothing but the ghost of a family, a fractured past, and a void I could never fill. It was the sound of high heels clicking on the floor that pulled me from my thoughts. It was unmistakable, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But no, I didn't imagine it. It was Vanessa. I didn't have to see her face to know it was her. The air around me seemed to shift the moment she stepped into the room. I had no idea how to react. I didn't know what to expect from this encounter, but I wasn't prepared for it. Not at all. I had assumed she would stay away. I had assumed that just like our mother, Vanessa would let me deal with everything on my own. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her presence so suffocating that for a moment I couldn't breathe. She didn't look at me with surprise or confusion or even anger. She just looked at me, like I was just another fixture in the room. And that, in itself, was the most painful thing of all. She wasn't shocked by my return. She wasn't moved by it. I was just there, another part of the scenery. "Well, look who's finally come back," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a greeting. It was just a fact, a statement, as though my return didn't matter to her, as though I didn't matter. I stood frozen for a moment, my throat tight with emotion. The words I had prepared in my mind for this exact moment, words of anger, of hurt, of years of betrayal, seemed to vanish into thin air. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't find the strength to say what I needed to say. I couldn't even bring myself to confront her, to tell her how much pain she had caused me. Her eyes scanned the room, but never met mine. It was as though I didn't even exist, and maybe, in her world, I didn't. She turned back to face me, her gaze finally locking onto mine, and for a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, but it was gone almost instantly. I couldn't place it. But whatever it was, I didn't want to know. "You know, Anna," she began, her voice soft but condescending, "I've been thinking a lot about this whole situation, having to come back here, handle everything, deal with all this." She waved a hand, indicating the house, the family estate, the mess our mother had left behind. "It's a lot of pressure. I'm really going to need your understanding here. I know this is hard for you, but you'll get over it. I mean, you always do, right?" Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't the pain of the loss. It wasn't the grief of losing our mother. It was the way she said it, the way she dismissed me, the way she trivialized everything I had felt, everything I had been through. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even acknowledging the years of emotional neglect and hurt I had carried. No, She was more concerned with how this situation was affecting her. She wasn't even thinking about me. She never did. I could feel my chest tighten with frustration, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Her lack of empathy was a blow to everything I had ever hoped for. It wasn't just that she had everything our mother had to offer, it was that she didn't care that I had been left with nothing. Nothing but this hollow feeling, this empty space inside me that I had tried for years to fill. You know, she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It's just the way things are. Mom always had her favorites, didn't she? And it wasn't me, was it? She chuckled lightly, but there was no humor in her voice. She was mocking me. She was dismissing me. Again, I wanted to shout at her. I wanted to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had taken from me, how much she had left me with nothing. I wanted to scream at her, to let her know how much she had crushed me over the years, how much I had struggled to survive in her shadow, how much I had been ignored, left behind, forgotten. But I couldn't. Her gaze softened again, but only slightly, as she took a step closer, tilting her head as though she were considering my reaction. But we can't choose who we love, can we? It's just the way things were always meant to be, she said, her words patronizing, almost as though she were speaking to a child. I couldn't take it anymore. Don't pretend to understand, I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. Don't act like you've been through anything like I have. You've never had to fight for anything. Everything was always handed to you, Vanessa, and you've never once cared about what I've been through. She just smiled, that same arrogant smile that had always made my blood boil. You should try to let go of all this, Anna. You're holding on to something that doesn't matter anymore. Mom's gone. You need to move on. And that was it. That was the final blow. The words that confirmed everything I had known all along. Vanessa didn't care. She never would. She was still the center of our mother's world, and I was just nothing. I stood there, shaking, fighting back tears that I refused to let fall. I had always been the one left behind, and nothing was ever going to change that. She had won. Again. But something inside me stirred, a quiet, burning rage, a realization that no matter how much she had taken, no matter how much she had gotten away with, I would no longer allow myself to be invisible. I would no longer let anyone define my worth. The moment I stepped into my mother's study, I felt a wave of nostalgia and bitterness overwhelm me. It was as though the house, which had always seemed so cold, suddenly grew warmer, yet the warmth felt suffocating. There was something about this room that made it feel different, a place where secrets had been tucked away carefully, almost with reverence, as if my mother had wanted to shield the truth from ever seeing the light. It was the one room that had always been closed to me growing up, and I had always wondered what was locked away inside it. I tried not to focus on the empty space around me, the disarray of old papers that filled the desk drawers, the piles of letters that hadn't been touched in years. But in that moment, I felt compelled to find something, anything, that would make sense of the betrayal, the emotional neglect, and the pain that had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember. This was where the truth lay. I just had to uncover it. I opened the first drawer, the one I remembered my mother always keeping locked when I was a child. Even now, the weight of that childhood memory sat heavily on my chest. She had always been so secretive, as if she knew something I didn't, or perhaps was hiding something from me, something she didn't want me to find. I never knew why, but now I was determined to unearth whatever it was. Inside the drawer were old receipts, faded photographs, and various knickknacks that looked as though they had been there for decades. But one thing stood out, a small worn envelope that had been stuffed under a stack of old letters, its edges frayed with age. It didn't have an address. It wasn't even sealed. I pulled it out slowly, feeling a strange unease coil in my stomach. It was Vanessa's handwriting on the front, immediately recognizable, the loopy, elegant script that made everything look effortless. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges soft with time. The letter inside, written in Vanessa's voice, felt like a punch to my gut. The words were coated in honey, soft and affectionate, but the more I read, the more I realized just how venomous they were beneath the surface. Dearest Mom, I know how much you care for Anna, and I know you're always trying to do what's best for her. But I can't help but worry about how she's been acting lately. She's so careless. She never appreciates what you've done for her, and it's been breaking my heart to watch her push you away. I think it's time we talk about this before things get worse. She doesn't know how to take care of herself, and she's been treating you as though you owe her something when you've already given her everything. I think you deserve more than that, don't you? I just want to protect you from her behavior. The words burned in my hands. Every line was a jab. It was like reading a script of my worst nightmares, the confirmation of everything I had feared. She had been poisoning our mother's perception of me for years. She had written me off as a troublemaker, as reckless, as someone who was undeserving of the love I had always hoped for. She had carefully painted me as the villain in the story of our family. Vanessa had turned my mother's heart against me, slowly, quietly, and I had never known. I threw the letter down on the desk, my fingers trembling. This wasn't just a letter. It was a manifesto of manipulation. It was clear now. Vanessa had always been in control. She had orchestrated everything. She had twisted the narrative, making me the one who was always causing problems, always difficult, always ungrateful. But none of it was true. I wasn't the problem. She was. I moved to the next drawer. The papers in it were old, dating back to when I was a child. I started sorting through them mechanically, each document revealing a new layer of my mother's mindset, a window into how she had been manipulated into believing the lies Vanessa had woven. There were letters from when I was in high school, desperate pleas from me to my mother for validation, for approval, for some semblance of a relationship. But instead of finding a mother's loving words, I found cold, harsh notes from Vanessa, written like whispers in the night, nudging my mother to keep an eye on me, to be careful with me. She's pushing you away, Mom. You need to put your foot down. Don't let her walk all over you. She needs discipline. And she needs to understand that you're not here to be her friend. She's taking advantage of your kindness. Every note was a reminder of how carefully Vanessa had engineered this divide. Every letter, every carefully constructed sentence was a nail in the coffin of any hope I'd had of being loved by my mother. The more I read, the angrier I became. The more I unearthed, the clearer it became that Vanessa had been the architect of my suffering. I wasn't just rejected by my mother. I was made to be the one who was wrong. I had been manipulated, gaslighted into believing that everything that had gone wrong in our relationship was my fault. And the worst part? I had believed it. I had blamed myself for everything that had happened, when all along it had been Vanessa pulling the strings. The more letters I read, the more pieces of the puzzle I uncovered, the more I felt a burning rage building up inside me. I couldn't contain it anymore. It was like a fire had been lit deep in my chest, and it was consuming me from the inside out. The lies, the manipulation, the way Vanessa had ruined any chance I had of having a real connection with my mother. It all felt like a betrayal of the highest order. I had spent years trying to figure out what had gone wrong, blaming myself, wondering where I had failed. But I had never considered that the entire narrative had been skewed from the start. Vanessa had poisoned the well, twisted the truth, and made sure that I would always be the villain in the story. And the worst part was that my mother had never even questioned it. She had taken everything Vanessa said as gospel. I could feel the anger seeping into my bones, running through my veins like wildfire. The betrayal was so deep, so vast that I could hardly breathe. How could Vanessa do this to me? How could she take everything from me and leave me with nothing but the wreckage of our family? How could she make my mother believe I was unworthy of her love, of her affection, of her care? I slammed the drawer shut with a violent force, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everything I had just discovered. I couldn't take it. I needed to get out of here, to get away from this house, from these memories that had been haunting me for years. But as I stood there, my hands shaking with fury, something inside me shifted. I couldn't leave it like this. I couldn't let Vanessa have won. She had spent all these years making sure I was the one who suffered, and I wasn't going to let her continue to do so. Not anymore. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was empowered. The truth had set something free inside me. I wasn't the broken, lost girl who had been abandoned by her mother. I was someone who had finally seen the truth, and now I was going to do something about it. As I stood there in the study, the silence around me was deafening. But I wasn't hearing it anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own thoughts, of the words I had just read, of the revelations that had changed everything. I had been living in the shadow of Vanessa's lies for so long that I hadn't even realized the power I had been giving her. But now, I knew the truth. I knew who the enemy was. Vanessa had been manipulating everyone around her, turning them against me. She had turned my mother into a puppet, and I had been the one on the receiving end of her strings. I wasn't just the victim of a mother who had stopped loving me. I was the victim of a sister who had used her charm, her influence, and her manipulation to tear us apart. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully Vanessa had constructed this narrative, how deliberately she had made sure that I would never have a place in our family. She had used my mother's love for her against me, twisting it, turning it into a weapon to keep me at bay. And in the process, she had destroyed me. But no more. I couldn't let her have this power over me anymore. I couldn't let her continue to control my life. I had spent too long in her shadow, too long being manipulated by her lies. It was time for me to take control, to reclaim the part of myself that had been stolen. I wasn't just going to sit by and let her win. Not this time. This time, I would expose her. This time, I would make her pay for what she had done to me. And I would make sure that everyone knew the truth. That everyone would finally see who the real villain was. The weight of everything I had uncovered began to crush me in waves. The letters, the documents, the truth I had discovered about Vanessa's manipulation. It all spiraled in my mind like a relentless storm. I was drowning in it. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe. The walls of my mother's house, which once felt so familiar, now felt suffocating. They were closing in on me, heavy with the weight of what I'd learned. I'd thought that learning the truth would bring relief. After all, the burning questions that had haunted me for years had finally been answered. I knew why my mother had always treated me the way she did. I knew who was responsible. Vanessa. She had been the one pulling the strings all along, the one making sure I was always the outsider, the one who never truly belonged. She had poisoned my mother's view of me, slowly, methodically, until all the love I had hoped for from my mother had vanished into thin air. And yet, knowing the truth didn't bring me peace. It only made the hurt worse. I sat in the corner of my mother's study, staring at the papers scattered before me. The letters from Vanessa, the ones that twisted the truth and painted me as the villain, those were the ones I focused on. But it wasn't just anger I felt as I read them. It was confusion, too. How had Vanessa managed to pull this off for so long? How had she managed to manipulate everyone around her into believing that I was the problem? How had I been so blind to it all these years? Was it my fault for being so naive? Was it my fault for believing that one day my mother would love me the way I had always longed for? But there was something else I realized as I sat there, my fingers trembling with rage. I had spent so many years thinking that if I could just be good enough, if I could just prove myself, my mother would finally see me. But the truth was, my mother never could see me the way I needed her to, because Vanessa had made sure of it. She had carefully shaped the story of our family, crafting a narrative where I was always the problem, always the one who didn't measure up. And now, after everything I had been through, after all the pain and frustration, I was left with one brutal truth. I would never be enough for her. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because my mother had been manipulated into believing that I wasn't. I felt the weight of it crash down on me. The sense of worthlessness that had plagued me for so long felt almost suffocating. I could feel the years of neglect and emotional abuse flooding back into my chest. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of my own hurt. All these years I had been carrying the weight of a lie, thinking that I wasn't good enough, thinking that I was the one at fault. But in truth, I was never the problem. I had been played. Vanessa had orchestrated every step of this. Part of me wanted revenge. God, how badly I wanted it. I wanted Vanessa to feel the weight of the lies she'd told, the manipulation she'd sowed. I wanted her to know how much she had hurt me, how much she had stolen from me. How could I not want to make her feel the pain she had caused me for all these years? But another part of me just wanted closure. I didn't want to be angry anymore. I didn't want to hold on to this rage that had festered in my heart for so long. It was exhausting. The anger had been my fuel for so long, but now, as I sat there, I realized how much it was consuming me. I didn't want to be this person anymore. I didn't want to let Vanessa control me, even from a distance. I didn't want to let her dictate how I felt, how I saw myself. I wanted to heal. But could I heal if I let this go? Could I move on if I didn't make her face what she had done? I didn't know. And the uncertainty gnawed at me. I stood up from the desk, pacing the room as my mind raced. The conflicting feelings, the anger, the hurt. It was too much to process all at once. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just angry at Vanessa anymore. I was angry at myself too. How had I let this go on for so long? How had I let Vanessa control my life, my relationship with my mother for all these years? But I didn't have time to think about that now. There was something more urgent. I found Vanessa in the kitchen a few days later. The house had been quiet, empty, almost as if the silence had become a part of the air itself. The discovery of Vanessa's manipulation had rocked me to my core, and I needed answers. More than that, I needed some acknowledgement from her. I needed to confront her, to hear her say the things she had never said, to take responsibility for the havoc she had wreaked on my life. Vanessa stood by the counter, making herself a drink, looking as perfect as always. She didn't even glance up when I entered the room. She didn't need to. She was used to me, used to being the one who controlled the room, the one who had everyone's attention. I took a deep breath. "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned slowly, that same knowing smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Anna, I was wondering when you'd show up. What's going on? Is everything okay?" She said it in the same tone she always used. Sweet, pleasant, like she was talking to a child. I could feel the anger stirring inside me, but I held it in. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low. "About what you've been doing, about the lies you've been telling, about how you've manipulated everything to turn my mother against me." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something cold, something calculating, manipulated. Oh, Anna, please. I haven't done anything but try to help. Her voice was smooth, like she was explaining something to a child. I've always been the one who looks out for you, even when you don't realize it. I felt my chest tighten. The dismissiveness in her voice was suffocating. How could she say that with a straight face? How could she act like she had done anything but tear our family apart? You've been feeding lies to Mom for years, I said, stepping closer to her. You've made her think I was the problem. You've made her think that I was ungrateful, that I was difficult to deal with. You've manipulated her into rejecting me, and you've done it all while acting like the perfect daughter. Don't try to deny it. I've seen the letters, Vanessa. I know what you've done. Her smile faltered for a split second, but then she straightened up, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Letters? You've been snooping around, Anna? You always were so paranoid. She let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was condescending, mocking. You always think everything is a conspiracy. It's exhausting, really. Stop lying to me, I said, my voice rising. I know what you've done. You've poisoned everything. You've destroyed any chance I had of having a real relationship with our mother. You've made sure I was always the one left out, the one abandoned. And you did it all with your lies. Vanessa's expression remained cool, unaffected. Oh, Anna, she said, her voice dripping with pity. You're still trying to make it about you, aren't you? You've always been so dramatic. Don't you see? This isn't about you. It never was. Mom needed someone to depend on, and I was the one who was there for her. I was the one who always put her first. You never did. And that's why you'll never get it. I could feel the weight of her words crushing me, each one a blow to the fragile sense of self I had worked so hard to rebuild. She was right. She was always right. She had always been the one who mattered. She had always been the one who was loved. And I was just the one who couldn't live up to her standards. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why have you spent all these years making me the enemy? What did I ever do to you? Vanessa's gaze softened just a little, but it wasn't empathy. It was condescension. You were always so selfish, Anna, she said, her voice like velvet, but with an edge that cut deep. You've always wanted to be the center of attention, to make everything about you. Mom and I had to deal with your tantrums, your neediness. It's always been about you, hasn't it? I stood there, frozen, my mind swirling. How had I never seen it? How had I never realized that Vanessa had been manipulating me this whole time, twisting my perception of everything, making me feel like I was the one at fault? Nothing you say is going to change anything, Vanessa added, her voice cold, dismissive. It's too late, Anna. Mom's gone. I'm the one who took care of everything. You can't change the past. You never could. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, and for a moment I felt the sting of defeat creeping in. She was right in some ways. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't change the years of hurt that had already been done. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her define me anymore. I wasn't going to let her continue to manipulate everyone, to destroy my sense of self, to make me feel invisible. No more. I turned away from Vanessa, my mind made up. I wasn't here to beg for her acknowledgement. I wasn't here to plead for a relationship that had been destroyed long ago. I was here to reclaim my dignity, to take back my narrative. I would expose the truth. I would take matters into my own hands and show everyone what Vanessa had done. I wouldn't let her keep playing the perfect daughter, the perfect victim. I wasn't going to allow her to keep me in the shadows anymore. This wasn't just about the estate. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about reclaiming my truth. Vanessa had stolen so much from me already, but this was something I could take back. And I would make sure she paid for what she had done. Not with vengeance, but with the truth. It was a quiet night when I began to formulate my plan, one that would eventually unravel everything Vanessa had so carefully built. The estate, the house, the wealth, none of it mattered to me. It wasn't about the money, not really. What mattered was reclaiming something that had been taken from me, something that had been stolen piece by piece over years, under the guise of a perfect family. That thing was my dignity, my place in this world. And if I had to expose Vanessa for the liar and manipulator she was to get it back, then so be it. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to beg for approval, for love, or for validation. I had spent years trying to be worthy in someone else's eyes, my mother's, Vanessa's. But it was all a lie, and the more I uncovered, the more I felt a fire burn inside me. I had spent so much time thinking of them, hoping they'd see me for who I truly was. I was exhausted. I needed to see myself. The moment the realization hit me, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I wasn't the helpless victim anymore. I was no longer defined by the betrayals of the past. I could feel the anger pulsing through me like a current. But now, instead of letting it consume me, I was using it. I was using it to fuel something much greater. I was going to take control of everything. It started with the estate. I didn't know where to begin, but instinctively, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, legalities, red tape, things Vanessa had made sure were locked behind closed doors. But there had to be a way through, a way to challenge what was taken from me. I wasn't going to let Vanessa get away with this. Not now, not ever. I started my investigation in secret. The first step was to gather all the documents I could find. I knew that in order to fight Vanessa, I had to understand what she had done. The papers, the legal documents, the will, it all had to be carefully analyzed. I spent hours poring over everything, scanning the words, looking for any inconsistencies, any cracks in Vanessa's meticulously crafted facade. I remember sitting in the dimly lit study, piles of papers scattered around me. My mother's handwriting, the formal language of lawyers, the business terms that meant nothing to me when I was younger but now were starting to make sense. The scent of the old books that lined the walls mixed with the stale air, and I was alone in the house, save for the occasional creaks and groans that seemed to echo from the old structure. But despite the isolation, I felt a sense of purpose surge through me. This was no longer just about the estate. This was about me taking back my life. There were moments when the anger would bubble up uncontrollably, moments when I would slam my fist on the desk and shout in frustration, as if doing so could force the answers to come faster. The truth was, I had been living in the shadows for too long, and Vanessa had made sure that I was always the one left behind. But I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. I was going to bring her down with her own lies, with her own manipulation. I began by going through old financial documents, estate plans, and the will. And there, hidden among the piles of clutter, I found what I was looking for. There was a clause buried deep within my mother's will, a small section I had missed before. It didn't seem significant at first glance, but when I read it again, it struck me. It said that if Vanessa were to contest any portion of the estate, the matter would have to be settled privately, through a mediator. I hadn't realized it before, but this clause gave me an opening, an opportunity to challenge Vanessa's claim. I could feel my heart racing as I reread the clause. It was as though the universe had given me a small crack in the door, a sliver of light in an otherwise dark room. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew it was important. This could be the key to everything. If I could find a way to use this clause, I could force a legal battle, a battle where I could uncover the truth. Vanessa would have to answer for everything. She would have to justify the lies she'd told, the manipulation she had masterminded. I needed someone on my side, someone who could help me navigate this maze of legal jargon. I needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid to stand up to Vanessa, someone who understood how to work around the legal roadblocks that had been placed in my way. But not just any lawyer. I needed someone who understood what I had been through, someone who could see the bigger picture. That's when I reached out to Jack Thompson. I'd known Jack for years. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a family friend, someone who had always been there when we needed him. He wasn't the type to take advantage of his connections, but he had the kind of integrity that made him stand out. When I called him and told him everything, he didn't hesitate for a second. Jack listened carefully to my story. He didn't interrupt or offer sympathy. He just let me speak. And when I finished, he asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want, Anna?" The answer was simple, even if I didn't fully realize it at the time. I didn't want revenge in the petty, destructive way that I had imagined. I didn't want to tear down Vanessa just because I could. What I wanted was justice. I wanted to expose the truth about what had happened. I wanted to show everyone the kind of person Vanessa truly was, the manipulator who had ruined our family for her own gain. I wanted to reclaim my dignity and my place in the world. This was no longer about them. It was about me. Jack helped me lay out a plan. We started by going over the financial records, cross-referencing them with my mother's will. Jack pointed out discrepancies, small details that I had overlooked. For example, he noticed a sudden change in the way certain assets had been reallocated in the years leading up to my mother's death. It seemed like Vanessa had been subtly influencing my mother's decisions without my knowledge. The more we dug into the documents, the clearer it became that Vanessa had been slowly consolidating power, ensuring that when the time came, she would inherit everything, with little to no challenge. But there was one thing Vanessa hadn't accounted for: me. I had spent years in the background, trying to be seen, trying to be acknowledged. But now, I was here, and I wasn't going to let her take everything from me without a fight. The more I worked with Jack, the more I felt empowered. Every document we reviewed, every step we took, felt like I was clawing my way back into the light. The pain that had been my constant companion for so long, of being overlooked, of being pushed aside, was slowly starting to fade. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It wasn't. But it was no longer in control of me. For the first time in my life, I was the one who had the power to shape the narrative. The estate wasn't just about money. It was about everything that had been taken from me. The love that had been denied. The recognition I had never received. This was my chance to take it all back. As the days passed, Vanessa remained blissfully unaware of what I was doing. She walked around the house like a queen, her every move fueled by the belief that she had already won. She didn't see the cracks in her carefully constructed world. She didn't see the storm I was preparing. Her overconfidence was almost laughable. She thought that because she had the money, the house, and the will in her hands, she was untouchable. She didn't realize that everything she had built was built on lies, and those lies were about to come crashing down. I could see it in the way she carried herself. She had this calm arrogance about her, a smugness that she wore like armor. She believed she had won. She thought she could just sit back and relax, knowing the estate was hers. She was blind to what was happening right under her nose. Every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of satisfaction. She thought she had already claimed victory, but she had no idea that I was moving closer to my goal. Slowly, steadily, I was inching toward exposing her for the manipulative, selfish person she truly was. and every step I took made me feel more powerful than I had ever felt in my life. I knew I had to be careful. Vanessa wasn't stupid, and if she caught wind of what I was doing, she would fight back with everything she had. But for now, she was blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing, unaware of the fact that I was about to expose everything she had done. And when the time came, I would make sure she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. She thought she had won, but I was about to show her just how wrong she was. Vanessa wasn't one to sit idly by when she realized that something was slipping through her fingers. At first, she had been so confident, so sure that the estate, the house, the family legacy were all firmly in her hands. But as she began to notice the subtle changes around her, my growing distance, my carefully orchestrated movements, the whispers among the few people who still respected me, she started to feel a shift. And that shift, to her, was a threat. She wasn't just going to stand by and watch everything she had built unravel. Vanessa wasn't the type of person to let anyone or anything stand in her way. So, she began to fight back. At first, it was subtle. I could feel it in the air, like a chill that hadn't been there before. She started showing up at the right places, having the right conversations with the right people, those who could be easily influenced, those who still thought of her as the perfect daughter. Her charm, as always, worked like a spell. She could twist any conversation to suit her needs, and she knew just how to make people feel like they owed her something. Vanessa's first move was to target Jack. She had seen him at the house once when he was helping me gather the necessary legal documents, and though I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary at the time, it wasn't long before she started turning the situation in her favor. One evening, I received a call from Jack. He sounded tense, almost uncomfortable. I could hear the hesitation in his voice as he spoke. "Anna, I think it's time we talk. There's been some movement on Vanessa's side, and we need to figure out what's going on." I wasn't surprised by the news. I knew that Vanessa wasn't going to give up without a fight. But what I didn't expect was the twist in Jack's voice when he continued. "I'm afraid I might have to step away from helping you with this. Vanessa has made it clear that if I continue to assist you, there will be consequences." My heart sank. Vanessa had done it. She had already begun working her magic, using threats and manipulation to try and silence me. Jack was a good man, loyal to a fault. But his position, his reputation, these were things that Vanessa knew exactly how to exploit. She didn't need to be physical. Her words were enough. "She's playing a dangerous game," Jack added, his voice strained. "I know you've got every right to fight this, but I don't want to put my career on the line for something that might not go in your favor." The weight of his words hung in the air, and I could feel the creeping sense of helplessness starting to return. Vanessa had done it again. She had used the one thing I could never control, other people's fear, to get what she wanted. But I wasn't backing down. No matter how much Vanessa tried to intimidate people, I knew I had to press on. The truth was my weapon. And I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. Vanessa didn't stop with Jack. She began making the rounds, subtly turning people against me, making sure that I was painted as the villain in this fight. It wasn't just Jack. It was anyone who might have shown even a hint of support for me. Anyone who had once thought I was the underdog or the one who needed help. She knew how to manipulate them, turning their perceptions, making them feel like they were doing the right thing by siding with her. I started hearing murmurs, small comments, made in passing, from people who had once been my allies. "I heard Vanessa's been doing everything she can to make sure the estate goes smoothly. She's the one who's been managing things for years, after all." Another comment from a family friend. "Anna, you've always been so emotional. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle this. Vanessa knows how to keep her head cool in these situations." These small jabs started to chip away at my confidence. I could feel the weight of them slowly beginning to affect me. It was like everyone around me was turning their backs, and I couldn't tell if they were just being manipulated or if they truly didn't care about me anymore. Vanessa, with her charm and calculated sweetness, had everyone eating out of her hand, and yet, the more she spoke about me, the more I realized that this was part of her grand plan. She wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to make me look like I didn't deserve anything. She was trying to isolate me, to make me seem like I was the one causing all the drama, all the trouble. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she hadn't accounted for, was that I wasn't going to play by her rules. I had been manipulated for too long. She may have been able to sway the opinions of others, but I had something she didn't. The truth. And the truth was my weapon. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control. The more Vanessa worked her charm, the more I felt the walls closing in. She had turned the family against me, had woven a narrative that painted me as nothing more than a troublemaker, a person who had no right to challenge the status quo. I could feel the frustration boiling up inside me. The anger that had been my constant companion for so long was back in full force. Every time I heard a new whisper about how I was the difficult one, the ungrateful one, my blood would boil. I had worked so hard to gain control of this situation, to take my life back. And yet, here I was, being dragged back into the role Vanessa had written for me. The victim, the one who wasn't capable of standing up for herself. It was almost too much to bear, but it didn't break me. Instead, it ignited something deeper. The more Vanessa worked against me, the more I knew that I couldn't back down. I couldn't let her win. I had come so far. I had uncovered the truth, had finally begun to understand the depth of her manipulation. I had learned how to play this game, and I was going to win. Not just for the estate, not just for the inheritance, but for me, for my own peace of mind. I had spent my entire life being defined by others, by Vanessa, by my mother, by society's expectations. But now I was taking control of my own narrative. Every piece of her manipulation, every lie, every attempt to turn people against me only made me more determined. The stakes were higher now. Vanessa knew that I was coming for her. She could feel the shift, and I knew that with every move she made, I was getting closer to exposing her. But Vanessa wasn't going to go down without a fight. As the days passed, I began to see the stakes more clearly. This wasn't just about the house, or the money, or the inheritance anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about justice. It was about standing up for myself after years of being manipulated and ignored. I was no longer just fighting for a piece of paper or a place in the will. I was fighting for my own sense of self-worth, for the person I had always been, someone who had been pushed aside for too long, someone who deserved more than just the scraps of affection that Vanessa had been kind enough to leave behind. The legal battles ahead were only one part of the equation. The other part, perhaps the more important part, was the emotional one. I had to find a way to stay grounded, to keep my focus. Because I knew that if I let Vanessa get inside my head, if I let her win with her words and her charm, I would lose everything. I had a new plan now. It wasn't about trying to destroy Vanessa. It wasn't about being petty or vindictive. It was about exposing the truth and making sure everyone saw who she really was. She had used her charm to manipulate everyone around her, but I was going to make sure that the truth came out. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and Vanessa still had no idea what was coming. But I knew, and I would be ready when the time came. The house was eerily quiet as I stood there, my heart thudding in my chest, nerves tangling with the sense of calm that had slowly settled over me in the last few days. It was strange. This calm, this overwhelming sense of purpose, it felt almost like an out-of-body experience. I wasn't the person I had been when I first walked through these doors. The broken, helpless woman I had been so many years ago, the one who had wanted nothing more than to be seen, to be loved, to be acknowledged, was gone. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who was ready to finally confront the very source of her pain. Vanessa. I had spent so much of my life hiding in the shadows of our family dynamics, always the outsider, always the one who wasn't quite good enough. But in the quiet of this house, where memories of the past seemed to echo with each creak of the floorboards, I could feel the transformation in me. I had uncovered the truth about the manipulation, the lies, and the emotional cruelty that Vanessa had sowed over the years. The truth was in my hands now, undeniable, irrefutable, and it was time for Vanessa to face it, time for her to hear what she had done. And most importantly, time for me to stand tall and face her as the woman I had finally become. I had every piece of the puzzle. I had documents, letters, proof of every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd woven into our family's fabric, turning my mother against me, making me the villain in the story of our lives. Vanessa had been the puppet master, pulling the strings for years, making sure that I was always left behind, always the one who had to fight for scraps of love and affection. But now, that puppet master was about to have her strings cut. I found her in the living room. The room was warm, the fireplace crackling softly, and there she stood, Vanessa. As always, she looked effortlessly put together, her hair perfectly styled, her clothes pressed and pristine. She had the air of someone who walked through life as if the world was hers to command. That arrogance, that quiet but undeniable confidence, she wore it like a crown. She had always worn it, and it had always made me feel like I was invisible. She turned to face me as I walked in, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "Ah, Anna," she said, her voice sweet, almost saccharine. "I was wondering when you'd come down here. What is it now? Something else to complain about? Or are you just here to make things difficult for me, as usual?" I felt the familiar sting of her words, the way she had always been so dismissive of me. The way she made me feel as though everything I said, everything I did, was unimportant. But this time, I wasn't the same person who had spent years second-guessing herself. This time, I was the one who had the upper hand. "I'm not here to complain, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady, the edge of authority in it that I had never allowed myself before. I walked further into the room, placing the stack of papers on the coffee table between us. The sound of the pages shuffling as I set them down felt almost ceremonial. "I'm here to talk about the truth, about everything you've been doing behind everyone's back." She didn't flinch. In fact, she almost looked amused as she tilted her head slightly, her arms crossing over her chest. "The truth?" "Oh, Anna, please," she said, her smile only widening. "What could you possibly have to say that would be worth hearing? You've always been so dramatic, so extra with everything. We both know that none of this matters anymore. What's your point?" I leaned forward, my gaze never leaving hers. "The truth, Vanessa, is that you've been manipulating our mother for years. You've poisoned her view of me. You've lied to her, twisted everything I've ever done to make me look like the villain. And now I'm done being quiet. I'm done letting you get away with it." For a moment, Vanessa's expression flickered, a brief, almost imperceptible flash of surprise, but it quickly melted away, replaced by her typical condescending smile. "Manipulating, Mom? Oh, Anna, you've always been so dramatic. You think I—" She motioned to herself. "Have time for petty games like that? You're the one who's always been the problem. Don't you get it? Mom is tired of you. She's tired of your selfishness, your neediness. She's always been tired of it." I reached for the first letter I had pulled from the stack, the one that she had written to our mother all those years ago, detailing every supposed flaw I had, every mistake I had made. "This is where it started, isn't it?" I said, the letter trembling slightly in my hands as I placed it in front of her. "This is where you began your campaign to turn Mom against me. You made her believe I was the problem, that I was the one who couldn't ever live up to her expectations." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She looked at the letter, and I could see the briefest flicker of panic in her gaze before she quickly masked it. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice suddenly cold. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those are just notes. Words that mean nothing now." I didn't stop there. I laid out the rest of the letters, each one more damning than the last. Her handwriting, the way she twisted everything I did into something negative, something selfish, something ungrateful. I could see her trying to hold it together, trying to keep the control she had always so effortlessly wielded. But I wasn't backing down. "You don't get to control this anymore," I said, my voice unwavering. "You don't get to make me the villain in our story. You've been lying to our mother, manipulating her for years, and now everyone is going to know the truth." Vanessa stood there, silent. Her arms still crossed over her chest, but her lips now pressed tightly together. I could see the rage building in her, the panic rising as she realized that the truth was starting to come out. She wasn't in control anymore. "You think this is going to make a difference?" she said, her voice low, threatening. "You really think anyone is going to believe you over me, over everything I've done for Mom? I've always been the one who took care of everything, and you've always been nothing but a disappointment." I was done with her dismissive attitude, done with the way she had belittled me for so long. Her words no longer stung. They were empty, and I wasn't the person I used to be, someone who felt inferior to her, someone who questioned her every move. "No," I said firmly. "You're the one who's been lying. You've been manipulating Mom for years, making her think I was the one who didn't care, making her think I was the one who was selfish. And now I'm done with it. The truth is out, Vanessa. Everyone is going to know what you've done, and you can't take that back." Her face contorted with anger as she stepped forward, her fists clenched. "You don't understand. You're nothing. You always have been. You think you can just come here, dig up old letters, and turn people against me? You're delusional." I remained calm. My hands were steady as I looked at her. "No, I'm not delusional. You are. You've been living in your little bubble, thinking you could control everything, thinking you could make everyone see you as the perfect daughter. But you're not perfect. You're a liar, Vanessa, and I'm done letting you get away with it." For a long moment, Vanessa stood there, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone in the silence that followed. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The emotional release that followed the confrontation with Vanessa was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just about the documents, the letters, the evidence. It wasn't even about the estate, the house, or the inheritance. It was about something much deeper. It was about taking back my life, my truth, and my identity. I had spent years living in the shadow of my sister's lies, believing that I was the one who had failed, the one who wasn't worthy of love or affection. But now, everything had changed. The truth had been exposed. Vanessa's manipulation was no longer hidden. The people around me, my family, friends, those who had been swayed by her lies, could now see who she really was. I could feel the weight of my pain lifting, the years of frustration and hurt being acknowledged for the first time. It wasn't just about winning the estate. It was about reclaiming what had always been mine: my dignity, my self-worth, my place in this family. These were things that no one could take from me anymore. And when the legal battle finally concluded, when the estate was divided, it wasn't just a victory in terms of assets. It was the most important victory of all, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with me finally feeling seen. For the first time in my life, I stood tall, knowing that I had taken control of my own destiny. And in that moment, I felt like I had won something that was truly mine. It felt like everything had changed in an instant. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long, the burden of constantly trying to prove myself, to win approval from others, had finally lifted. As I sat in the quiet of the house, my house now, it was almost as if the world had slowed down. I could hear my own heartbeat, the soft rhythm of my breath, and I realized something I hadn't truly allowed myself to understand before. I had won. But the victory wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't the estate or the house, or even the legal battle that had consumed so much of my energy. No, it was something far more profound. The true victory wasn't in taking control of the estate. It was in taking control of my own life. When I had started this journey, I had been motivated by anger. Anger at Vanessa for everything she had done to me, anger at my mother for not loving me the way I had always wanted, and anger at myself for allowing it all to happen. I thought that if I could just get the estate, just take control of the things Vanessa had taken from me, that somehow it would heal all the wounds, that somehow I would finally be able to breathe easy. But now that the battle was over, I could see clearly. It wasn't the house that had caused me pain. It wasn't the money or the legacy or even the inheritance. It was the belief I had held on to for so long, the belief that I needed them to define me, that I needed their love, their approval, to feel worthy of anything. As I stood here now, in the quiet solitude of this house, with the documents signed and the final victory secured, I realized something monumental. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need my mother's love, nor did I need Vanessa's approval. I was no longer defined by their rejection, their manipulation, or their judgments. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that they had created for me, trying to shape myself into what they wanted me to be. But now I had created my own mold, my own definition of who I was. And that was the most freeing realization of all. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer needed anyone to tell me that I was worthy, that I was enough. I had spent so much of my life searching for external approval, whether it was from my mother, or from Vanessa, or from the people around me. But now, I saw it clearly. All I needed was to accept myself, to realize that I had always been worthy, even when they hadn't seen it, even when they had made me feel small. This wasn't about getting back at Vanessa for the years of pain she had caused me. No, revenge had never been the point. The point was reclaiming my dignity, my identity. I had taken back what had always been mine. The emotional chains that had bound me to their perceptions, to their manipulations, had been broken. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I began to realize that my original motive for revenge had been flawed. At first, I had thought this was all about showing Vanessa that I was just as capable, that I could be just as powerful as she was, and that I could take everything from her the way she had taken from me. But as the journey had unfolded, I came to understand something deeper. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. The truth was, I hadn't needed revenge. I had needed healing. I had needed to find myself again. I had spent so many years in the shadows of their expectations, feeling like I didn't matter, like I wasn't good enough. And I had let that belief shape me, shape my actions, my choices, and even my relationships. I had allowed their perceptions to become my reality, and for so long, I couldn't see that it was my story to write. It took me a long time to realize that revenge wasn't going to fill the emptiness I felt. It wasn't going to heal the wounds that had been carved into my heart. What I needed was to reclaim my sense of self, my power, my worth, my identity. I needed to stop looking to others for validation and start looking within. The house, the estate, the inheritance. It was never about those things. It was about me. It was about finally accepting myself for who I was and not letting anyone else's narrative define me. When I faced Vanessa, when I exposed her lies and manipulations, it wasn't just about revealing her deceit. It was about standing up for myself, about letting the world know that I would no longer be silenced, no longer be dismissed. I had spent years thinking I was less than I was, thinking I had to earn my place in this world. But now I saw the truth. I didn't have to earn anything. I was already worthy. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about freedom. The quiet that filled the house now was different from the silence I had known when I first came here. The silence before had been oppressive. It had been heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of years of neglect, rejection, and emotional manipulation. It had felt like I was trapped in a room with no windows, no door, no way out. But now, the silence was liberating. It was the kind of silence that comes when you finally breathe freely after years of holding your breath. The silence that fills a room after all the lies have been spoken, after all the illusions have been shattered. This was the silence of freedom. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. Everything that had been broken, all the parts of me that I had let others take and twist and manipulate, had finally come back together. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. I had my own. I had learned to love myself, to accept myself, to honor who I was, without conditions. The victory, as it turned out, wasn't in the estate. It wasn't in the house or the money or the legal battle I had won. It was in the emotional freedom I had given myself, the confidence that came with standing on my own 2 feet, without needing anyone else to tell me that I mattered. I mattered. I was enough. I thought back to the girl I had been, the one who had been so desperate for approval, for affection, for validation. I thought about the way I had been so willing to bend and twist myself to fit into the mold that my family, that Vanessa, had set for me. I had believed that I wasn't good enough unless I was what they wanted me to be. I had spent so much time and energy trying to meet their expectations, to make them love me, to make them see me. But I could never get it right. I could never be enough for them. Because the truth was, I had never needed them to define me. That girl, the one who didn't know her own worth, the one who thought that approval from others was the key to her happiness, she was gone. And in her place stood someone who finally understood what it meant to live authentically, to love herself, and to take control of her own life. No one else could do that for me. I had to do it myself. The legal battles were over. The estate was mine. Not because of greed, not because I had wanted to prove something to Vanessa or to anyone else. It was mine because I had earned it. Not through years of trying to fit into someone else's idea of who I was, but by finally claiming my right to be who I was meant to be. I had fought not for money, but for my dignity. And now, I had it. I had learned that my value didn't come from what others thought of me. It came from who I was inside. And for the first time, I felt at peace with myself. I didn't need the love of my mother to feel whole. I didn't need Vanessa's approval to know my worth. I was complete, just as I was. The quiet of the house was no longer oppressive, but peaceful. It had been a few weeks since the legal battles were over, since I had finally taken control of the estate. Not because of greed or the desire for revenge, but because I had earned it. The place was mine, but more importantly, I felt as though I was finally mine again. I was no longer bound by the expectations of others, by the judgments, by the wounds of my past. The journey had been long, it had been painful, and at times it had felt like I might never reach the end. But here I was, standing on the other side. The truth was out. I had exposed Vanessa's lies, fought for my place in this world, and won. Not in the way I had initially imagined, but in the most profound way possible. I wasn't the victim anymore. For so long, I had allowed myself to believe that my worth was determined by what others thought of me. I had internalized the idea that I wasn't good enough, that I would always be second best to Vanessa. I thought that if I could just prove myself, if I could just get my mother's approval, everything would fall into place. But in the end, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving something to myself. The pain was still there. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. The emotional scars from the years of neglect, manipulation, and emotional abuse didn't just disappear overnight. They still lingered. But the difference now was that I no longer allowed that pain to control me. The past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had learned to let go of the need for validation, to stop seeking approval from those who had never given it to me. I had come to understand that my worth wasn't tied to my mother's love or Vanessa's approval. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first set foot in this house. I had spent years being invisible, trying to fit into a mold that others had created for me, living in the shadows of people who couldn't see me for who I really was. But now I stood in the light of my own truth, and I was stronger for it. I had learned to love myself, to respect myself, to finally believe that I was enough. Not because of what I had done or what I had inherited, but because I was worthy of love and respect, just as I was. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had the power to control my future. The lies, the rejection, the emotional manipulation, they no longer had a hold on me. I had broken free from the chains that had kept me bound for so long, and now I could look forward to whatever came next, with my head held high and my heart open to new possibilities. I stood in front of the large window overlooking the backyard, the one that had been my mother's favorite spot. She used to sit here, watching the sunset. Her face bathed in the golden light as she drank her tea. I had always wondered what she was thinking in those moments, if she ever considered the family she had created, if she ever wondered what was missing. But today, standing there in that same spot, I felt no bitterness. I didn't feel angry or resentful anymore. Yes, I had been hurt. Yes, I had suffered. But I had come to realize that I couldn't change the past. What I could change, however, was what I did with the future. And that was the most freeing realization of all. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I had already started the process of sorting through my mother's belongings, carefully deciding what to keep and what to let go. There were items that held memories, pieces of the past that I wanted to carry with me, but there were also things that I didn't need anymore, things that belonged to a version of me who no longer existed, things that represented the emotional weight I had been carrying for far too long. One of those things was the house itself. Yes, it was mine, and I had fought for it, but I realized that keeping it wasn't the answer. The house was tied to too many memories, too much pain. It wasn't the place where I would build my future. It was a place that had been used to imprison me in the past. So, I decided to sell it. Not out of spite, but as a symbolic gesture. It was time to let go. Time to move forward. I reached out to a local real estate agent explaining that I wanted to put the house on the market. The agent was surprised, but they understood. I didn't need the property to prove anything anymore. I had already proven what I needed to prove. Now, I was going to take the next step toward building a life that was truly mine. As I signed the papers to officially list the house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was a symbolic gesture, but it meant everything. It was the last piece of the puzzle. The house, with all its ghosts of the past, no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't running away from it. I was simply stepping away from a chapter that was closed. I had the power to decide what my future would look like, and it was going to be filled with new possibilities, new dreams, and new experiences. But I didn't stop there. I wanted this new life to be built on something more than just the sale of the house. I wanted to make a real difference, a contribution that would outlast anything Vanessa or my mother could have ever given me. So, I decided to donate a portion of the estate to charity, specifically to an organization that supported young women who had been through emotional or psychological trauma, who had been manipulated or rejected by their families, just like I had been. It felt right. It felt like a full circle moment. I had spent so many years trying to break free from the damage my family had caused, and now I could help others do the same. It was a way to give back, to offer a chance for healing and growth to those who needed it most. The money I donated wasn't just going to a cause. It was going to help build something that was bigger than all of us. Something that would impact lives in ways that would last long after I was gone. This wasn't just about money. This was about purpose, about making sure that the pain I had endured had meaning, that it wasn't just something I carried around with me forever. It was about creating something positive out of the ashes, something that would help others rise above their own struggles. As the house was being prepared for sale, I began to take the first steps toward my new life. I was still processing everything, still figuring out who I was without the constant weight of the past holding me down. But I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free. I had learned that victory wasn't about beating someone else. It was about beating the version of yourself that had been defined by others' expectations. It was about reclaiming the pieces of you that had been taken and putting them back together in a way that was yours and yours alone. I didn't need my mother's love. I didn't need Vanessa's approval. I didn't need anyone else to tell me that I was worthy, because I knew it now. I was worthy of love. I was worthy of happiness. I was worthy of a life that was filled with peace, purpose, and joy. And as I stood on the precipice of this new beginning, I realized that this new version of me, was the person I had always been meant to be. The person I had fought for. The person who could finally look back at her past, not with resentment, but with acceptance. Because it had all led me here, to this moment of freedom. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I felt ready to step into it, knowing that whatever came next, I would be okay. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own future, and it was bright. The sky outside the window had faded to a soft lavender, the kind of twilight that signals the end of a long day, but also the beginning of something new. I had always been afraid of endings, of finality, of stepping into the unknown. For years, I had clung to the idea that I needed to stay in the past, to hold on to the old versions of myself, hoping that by doing so, I would somehow find the peace I had always craved. But now, standing in the quiet of this room, in the stillness that had come after so many years of chaos, I knew that I was ready to leave it all behind. The house, the estate, the drama, the manipulation, it all felt so distant now. It wasn't just the physical space that I was leaving behind. It was the emotional weight. The need to prove myself, the desperate yearning for approval. All of it had been part of me for so long, but no more. I was no longer the person I had been when I first walked into this house. I wasn't the young girl who had felt invisible, the woman who had been defined by the rejection and cruelty of others. That woman had spent years hoping for things that could never be given, hoping for love that had always been conditional, always had strings attached. I had lived in the shadow of my family's judgments, believing I was broken, believing I was unworthy of anything better. But in this quiet, in this moment of reflection, I realized something profound. I wasn't broken. I had never been broken. I had just been waiting for the right moment to see myself for who I truly was. The house that had once felt like a prison, a place of old memories filled with pain and longing, now felt like a distant part of my past. A chapter that had been completed. I had fought for control of the estate. Yes, but what I had really been fighting for wasn't ownership of property or money. It was ownership of my own life. I had reclaimed my dignity, my peace of mind, my ability to define myself. And in doing so, I had found a freedom I never thought I would experience. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of what I had left behind and not of what was to come. I walked through the house one last time, the echo of my footsteps resonating through the empty halls. The silence that had once been suffocating now felt freeing, as though the house itself was releasing me, letting me go, allowing me to step into the next phase of my life with a sense of completion. There was no need to hold on to anything. The past was no longer my anchor. I was my own anchor now. I could feel a lightness in my chest as I stepped into the front yard, my eyes drawn to the open space before me, the space that had always been there, but that I had never allowed myself to see. There was so much to look forward to. I didn't know exactly where life would take me from here, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready. Ready to take the next step. Ready to embrace everything that was waiting for me beyond the door of this house, beyond the constraints of my past. As I stood there, taking in the expanse of the world outside the house, I let my thoughts drift back to everything that had brought me here. The years of hurt, the feeling of being overlooked, of being undervalued, of constantly having to prove my worth to everyone, especially to the people who should have loved me unconditionally. I thought about Vanessa, the way she had always been the center of attention, always the one who seemed to have everything: control, power, validation. And I thought about my mother, who had been so caught up in the narrative that Vanessa had created that she couldn't see me. Couldn't see me for who I really was. But those days were over. The need for their approval was gone. The need to be validated by them, to be seen by them in the way I had always longed for, was no longer part of my story. I had learned to validate myself. To see myself as I truly was: strong, capable, worthy. This wasn't just about taking back what was mine from Vanessa. It wasn't even just about the estate, or the money, or the inheritance. It was about reclaiming my life, reclaiming my sense of self, my voice, my power. And in doing so, I had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next. The pain of the past still lingered, but it was no longer my burden to carry. I could feel the weight lifting off me piece by piece, until all that remained was a sense of calm, a sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had fought for what was mine. And now, I was ready to let go of the rest, the anger, the hurt, the fear, and embrace the future. With the house now officially sold, the last remaining tie to the past was severed. It felt final, but not in a way that left me feeling empty. Rather, it was liberating. The money from the sale had been directed toward a few causes I had been passionate about for years. I had always wanted to help those who had suffered in ways similar to mine, those who had felt abandoned, manipulated, unheard. I had made sure that a portion of the proceeds went toward charities that supported survivors of emotional abuse, particularly those who had been neglected or manipulated by family members. It was a small step, but it felt meaningful. It felt like I was turning my pain into something positive, something that could help others rise above their own struggles, just as I had. I also began to make plans for my own future, not just in terms of financial security, but personal fulfillment. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always wanted to pursue but had put off for years. The dreams I had left behind in the wake of the trauma of my childhood were now within reach. I was no longer afraid to take risks, to explore what I wanted out of life. For the first time, I felt the freedom to chase my passions without the weight of anyone else's expectations on my shoulders. I wasn't sure where this new path would take me, but I knew it was the right one. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my own terms. As I stood outside, looking at the vast expanse before me, I took a deep breath. The air was crisp, and the possibilities felt endless. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, no longer trapped in the story that had been written for me by my family, by Vanessa, or by my own fears. I was writing my own story now, one that was full of hope, potential, and freedom. The pain, though it still lingered, no longer defined me. I had found peace within myself. I had healed in ways I never thought possible, and I had come out the other side stronger and wiser. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to face whatever came next with the knowledge that I had the strength to handle it. And as I walked away from the house, toward the life that awaited me, I realized that I was no longer living in the shadow of my past. I was walking into the light of my future, free from the constraints that had once held me captive. I had reclaimed my life, and I was finally at peace. This was my new beginning,